So we are chatting through basically a beginner's guide to getting into the heavy metals, um, and some albums that myself and Ian think would be a good starting point. I suppose you actually were probably a bit more considerate to people's ears starting off, and that you made quite a good point that if we think about the things that actually got us into listening to heavier music, it was less heavy music to start off with, and that's why I've put in a little new metal album here in Papa Roach. But yeah, I guess that we
I
were
think
just
your
discussing,
affections, I
huh?
think your affections for that, I think your affections for that particular album may be based in nostalgia more than anything. I don't know if the old Gen Z is
Uh,
going to.
I think it's slept on, it's a gem of that era. But what you were just saying there, the reason why I want to throw the recording on now is that, I think for anybody who's getting into metal, the big obstacle is the vocals, but actually I don't think it's necessarily like screaming. I'll be interested to hear your take on this, but my take is that a big difference between metal, and you get this in certain types of rock as well, between metal and say pop music or other styles of music, is that really the song is being driven by the riff. The riff is what drives the song and kind of creates the musical theme. And even though there are outstanding vocalists in metal, um, it's almost more of an instrument in the way that it gets used. And certainly once you get into the harsher types of metal, you can get into certain types of death metal where you can't even fucking hear what the lyrics are. But I think that's one thing that makes it quite hard for people to get into it, is that they're used to the melody and the hook coming from the vocal. And in metal, it's really more of a riff driven songwriting structure.
Yeah, sometimes I think there are probably some subgenres of metal where that's not necessarily the case. And funnily enough, the ones I would say that I think that is generally true for are what would I are the types of metal that tend to be more popular in the mainstream. So I would
Yeah.
say something like metalcore is a good example of that.
Or
You know, like
power metal even, or
yeah, yeah, like I mean, um like there are some metalcore songs that have made it quite big. Like I mean, and even new metal as well is maybe an example of that to some degree. Probably not
mm,
as much as metalcore, but like some of the Howard Jones era, Kill Switch Engage, like from the End of Heartache album and stuff like that. Some of those songs got really, really big. Like the End of Heartache, the single,
yeah.
and I don't, maybe not in Ireland, but definitely would be songs that are recognizable. I mean, I don't know if you would classify them in this way, but like a couple of System of a Down songs are huge as well. And there is I guess that is more music driven, but I would say, yeah, definitely on the more extreme end, I agree with you. But there are probably some, and one of the things you could probably get into, and it depends what kind of listener you're appealing to, in the sense that like there is so much diversity within metal, it's hard to paint any aspect of it with a singular brush other than the fact that it tends to be extreme in some degree.
Yeah. I mean, there's people who are looking at this. Um, some of them might be called metal elitists, but there are several albums here that I think some people would look at and say that's not even part of the metal genre. Certainly, things like Papa Roach and the new metal thing got a lot of flack, and a lot of people would probably throw Godsmack in with that and Killswitch Engage to a certain degree. But I think anytime you try to get into the specifics of nailing down what exactly is a type of genre, it's too difficult to do, because it's not a formula, it's not a hard science, it's just kind of a general umbrella term that lets us navigate around, like discussing this stuff. But I suppose, where should we start? Should we start with where we think would be the best albums, or where would be the best kind of place for somebody to start and get into it, because we both have Black Sabbath Paranoid and Metallica Ride the Lightning. So I think we could probably both agree that those are kind of two of the essential ones to listen to. But is that a good starting point for somebody?
Well, yeah, when I was picking these five albums, and I said this to you off the recording, that I wouldn't say I picked them arbitrarily, but I picked them as examples of like the types of album I would like, good examples that
Sure,
I
yeah.
personally like as the types of album. And like to me, the two places I would start, and this is from my own personal experience, when I was an adolescent or whatever, was listening to like, yeah, those, I guess what would be called classic metal albums. Like what is Paranoid from the mid 70s, and then Ride the Lightning is 1984, something like
Mm,
that.
I think so, yeah.
Um, so you have those like early classic albums, and the reason I would pick them is aside from like principally they're really really good, but secondly I think by way of their age they are less extreme than what um tends to be released kind of more recently. They're
Yeah.
less evolved in some respect, which means they're more digestible to someone who has, let's say, an untrained ear.
Yeah. Well, fuck, this stuff
Similarly,
gets played in sports stadiums now. Like For Whom the Bell Tolls gets played at NFL games.
everybody's heard Iron Man and Paranoid. I don't care
Yeah.
who, like, even if you don't know you've heard it, you say, "Oh, Paranoid by Black Sabbath." They're like, "I don't know the song." You put it on, and you go, "Oh yeah, I've heard the same with the Ace of
Yeah.
Spades," which is another example of an album. The first place, the first block that I would say is like a starting block is maybe one of those classic albums.
Yeah.
But some people are weird and they don't like listening to old music because they don't like the production. They think it's like watching a black and white movie for some people. So the other place I would
Yeah.
suggest people
But
could.
sorry, not to interject, but this is one angle I was coming at this from with my selections is that I not only did I want to pick albums that I thought would be good introductions to people to the genre, but I also kind of wanted to think about like what are the albums that I could say probably, like, if you didn't like any of them, I could probably say with high certainty that this maybe just isn't for you. Because when you think about it, all of our friends who are into metal, you know, everybody can appreciate Paranoid, everybody can appreciate Ride the Lightning, Motorhead, and there's a reason these bands have probably influenced more bands within the genre than anybody else. Like Tony Iommi himself kind of wrote the basis of every good metal riff before any other bands came along. It just got sped up or done in a different type of rhythm. But like, I suppose it's important from a historical perspective as well to listen to something like Black Sabbath and understand where everything else came from.
Yeah, I actually would have to disagree to some degree. And again, I'm disagreeing from the point of my own personal experience because I actually, and I don't know if this was the case with you, I got into these albums in retrospect. So
Mhm.
I was into other types of metal music, and then I was quite young. I was probably 12 or 13. And you know yourself, you just kind of stumble into bands through, at the time, it was YouTube, just as YouTube was kicking off. This is us showing our age now.
We're back in the
But,
day.
and even MTV, I don't think Headbangers Ball was something I ever watched, but you'd occasionally
No.
see a System of a Down video or a Linkin Park video on an MTV play back when MTV showed
Yeah, for
music.
sure.
But so sorry, I'm rambling now, but so actually, when like I realized I was into metal because I had a couple of albums and a couple of bands that I liked and blah blah blah, and then you hear those bands talk about the bands that influenced them, the Black Sabbaths, the
Mhm.
Metallicas, and so forth, and then I went back as a point of curiosity. So, um, I actually think, yeah, you can do it, and maybe it'll work for you. But I think because if I'm taking this from the perspective of someone who has never really, maybe has heard metal songs here and there, but is curious about whether they would like it or has heard a few songs that they like, I think you should find things that are in the metal space, but have that sound similar to things you already like, and then go
Sure.
from there.
Yeah.
Find a fitting. So that's why the next point I was going to make was why I picked the Godsmack album was it's kind of like I mean they're allegedly heavily inspired by bands like Alice in Chains and Nirvana and stuff like that, but they're
Yeah.
kind of hard rock. They're like very very hard rock, and so
But yeah, so let's
if
let's
you've
start with
ever
that. Let's start with that as our first one. And I actually To be 100% honest, have never listened to these guys before, and I listened to them. I listened to two tracks in the car coming home from work. One of them was Whatever, I think it was called,
So I
and
like that song. I actually like all this album.
the first thing that came to my mind was Alice in Chains. It actually sounds like kind of a slightly lighter Alice in Chains. And I had considered putting in Dirt as you know a substitute for something like Papa Roach there, or like within this vein. But so talk to me about this album, because I haven't listened to this before.
Well, I think Godsmack is an Alice in Chains song. It's on Alice in Chains songs I've ever
It's
heard
on
of
Dirt,
before,
yeah.
but this is
That's a
yeah,
song on
okay,
Dirt,
sorry,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So so obviously that would, be pretty suggestive of a relationship there in terms of inspiration. But yeah, I think they're like another one I thought about slotting in because they were quite big for a while. I mean, the first probably three metal bands, if you want to, I'm using air quotes there that I listened to, were Evanescence, Breaking Benjamin, and Godsmack. And those are,
Mm.
there's definitely guys with long hair and an Amon Amarth t-shirt. Hi Sam, rolling their eyes at me saying that, but you know what I mean? Like I would say like the metal bands that I got into initially were like a Nickelback extra
Yeah.
strong. You know what I mean? Kind of. And I think a lot of people, and I kind of wear that proudly. I still listen to these albums and I like them, I think they're
Yeah,
good.
totally.
Um I think I'm just coming from the perspective of most people have heard like maybe a more upbeat, like hard rock song, like a Nickelback or something like that,
Yeah,
and gone like, "Ooh, that's got a little something in it." And then I would kind of say, "Well, here are some albums that are like that, but
sure.
the whole product is more consistently in that stronger direction." And then when that
Yeah,
becomes more palatable, you give
because
someone something more extreme. That would kind of be
yeah,
my approach. Um, like again it could work with the earlier metal stuff, but I think again I come from this weird perspective, I think, where like look, you listen to, say for example, these bands that have influenced like basically everybody. Bathory is a great example. Like sometimes I listen to Bathory and I'm like, holy crap, this is in literally everything from 1995 onwards to some degree, particularly on the guitars.
yeah.
So like you listen to stuff like that, or Motorhead, another great example.
But
but
and you can
I
hear Motorhead in Bathory, so it's crazy when you start hearing all the different connections.
I hear them in retrospect. Like I'll hear songs that I've listened to for 10 plus years,
Yeah.
when I was like 20 or 20 when I was like 12 or 11, listening to these, for example, like if I listen to Godsmack now, I hear the Alice in Chains, but the first time I heard that,
Mhm.
listen to the Godsmack albums, I didn't know who Alice in Chains were. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Well, talk to me about,
but
because if somebody's never listened to Godsmack before or Alice in Chains, what is this album like?
I would say it's like, and I do wonder if we're being old farts here now because of an anecdote you gave us. It comes aside, when you're in the gym and you put on Rage Against the Machine and none of the kids knew it. But so I mean, I'm going to be like,
Oh, that's good.
Godsmack, they're like Alice in Chains, and
Yeah.
then people are going to be like, what are you talking? Who are these bands?
Yeah.
So to me, I actually hear a lot of Breaking Benjamin is another good example as well. I would say they're like a heavier Nirvana or a Soundgarden, but they're less
Okay.
weird in the sense that, like, like Nirvana, like the tunings can be a bit squeaky and stuff
Mm,
like that. The lyrics are nonsensical and they're intentionally so, and it's a bit, it's good, but it's just a bit weird.
yeah.
I would say like Alice in Chains are like on the same level of Nirvana in terms of their grunginess, but more
Mm,
coherent. And then Godsmack would be a more like mid 2000s has a flip phone version of that, where it's like fairly. It almost sounds like it was made by, you know, like it feels a little bit more like label formed, kind of, more of a
mm,
product than an experiment.
yeah.
um I guess a less cynical version would define that as refined. But yeah, that kind of a way.
But something that we can talk about later when we get to the Pantera album is how much they influenced. Now, I'd say Godsmack's more influenced by bands like Alice in Chains, but I do feel like a huge amount of the bands that came along in the post 2000s were influenced by the Phil Anselmo vocal style and the down tuning and everything. But
And
for
even the
anybody,
guitars as well.
yeah, for anybody listening, this is a very strange album cover. We've got a goth chick with like, I'm gonna say like a biro drawn on eyebrows. Like those are the thinnest eyebrows I think I've ever seen in my life. It's the
They
most
pulled her
like,
out of the right
when did this
venue.
album come out? It looks like 2001 or something like that.
Uh, yeah, it's late 90s, early 2000s. I actually have the Wikipedia page up here because I'm a schmuck. It's 1998. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how dated that goth chick look is.
What are you talking about? That's totally come back.
Not the
Jesus
eyebrows.
Christ.
Those eyebrows are terrifying.
Fool, I've seen a few. Now I live in the city centre of Dublin, so I've seen a few of those rocking around now on George's Street.
You're living in Temple Bar, so you go outside
Yeah,
Nine
that's.
Crows, you're gonna see some weird stuff.
But
Okay, that's Godsmack. Anything else to say on that?
no, I just think it's an easy start. Like, I mean, again, if I was really to link it to like more mainstream acts, I would say like it's Nickelback whose parents were especially mean to them or something like that. You know what I mean? It's not if you like kind of a Nickelback, it's a nice place to start. And again, if you were to listen to say some of the kind of Nickelback songs are a little heavier, you would find this as maybe a bit of a splash cold water on your face, but it would be palatable.
Right. Okay.
And the musicianship, it's simple, but the musicianship on it is good. The vocals are good. The songs are catchy.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So my pick, if we're going with palatability, on my side of things I've chosen, I'm probably gonna go Papa Roach first. Now, this
Yeah,
album definitely falls. Have you listened to these guys? You obviously know.
I love this album. I've listened. This is the only album of theirs I would say I know cover to cover.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Um,
these guys are a band that they're not a one-hit wonder, but they're kind of a one-album wonder, in that this is by far head and shoulders above anything else they did. The album that came after this, that has the baby with the headphones on the front, isn't bad either. Um, and then they kind of got worse then as they went on in kind of the mid to later 2000s. But this
I
album,
did come.
sorry, go on.
I did come across something they released maybe in the late 2010s or whatever that they had gotten quite poppy, which is, I mean,
Yeah,
it happens. But yeah, they're kind of they, like, I mean, this album has some packs and punches on it to some degree.
this album's got some bangers. Like, everybody knows Last Resort. I would imagine anybody hears that song, they're gonna know that. But I don't actually think that's the best song on this album. Dead Cell, that's a fucking banger. Um,
No, Blood Brothers, Tony
Blood
Hawk
Brothers
Pro
is
Skater
good as
2.
well.
Let's go.
The thing that I like, the reason why I chose this album, what you were talking about there, about how, when you're getting into metal, you want some stuff that you already kind of feel comfortable with, that's kind of interlaced with the heaviness. And so I think Papa Roach actually hits a few different areas that would be of interest to people of like other fans. So if you're a fan of the whole kind of emo pop punk thing, there's kind of a little bit of that going on in this. Not too much. There is a little bit of kind of rapping almost going on in it. And then you've obviously got just kind of like the general kind of down-tuned, heavy new metal type riffs that I personally love, and I went through a period of thinking that was stupid, but like, you can't deny that it's extremely catchy. And these guys were kind of riding the crest of that new metal wave. In fact, there's even a documentary. What is that called? Metal Headbangers Journey. I think it's in
Oh, I
that
know the guy.
documentary, or they did
That
an
guy's done a
episode.
documentary on everything to do with metal.
Yeah, he did an episode
Yeah,
on new
yeah.
metal anyway, and the lead singer of this band like very candidly says that, we basically couldn't have hit at a more perfect time. Like, it was just as bands like Limp Bizkit and Korn had kind of carved a path for this to be, you know chart topping rock music. And I think this is a great album. Like, it's a genuinely good songwriting, and I think that it has enough of the heavy elements of metal that it could get somebody interested into getting something that's maybe a little bit more within the actual kind of straight up metal genre.
And I
So
mean, the thing I would say as well is, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
like this band is still going and they're still releasing albums that are apparently well received. So you could have something where you're like, oh, I've actually heard some of the later stuff of this band, which has gotten softer. Let's take two steps backwards. And I mean, if you like their newer stuff, you may,
yeah,
it's that paradox of, if you like a band's early work, you tend to hate their newer work. But if you like a band's newer work, you can still like their older work, that
well,
kind of.
yeah, and actually, I think the thing that got me into this album was some of the stuff they released around the time we were in our teens. It was the album that had that song "Change or Die" on it, and the not
There's
so PC song anymore, "Hollywood Whore." Um,
Yeah, so there's two songs they have, and I don't know what album they're on. I would have to presume it's the next one. They have a song called Scars that I quite like, and they have
I
another one
think
called
that's the
Getting Away
same
with Murder,
album. I
which
might
is
be
again a
wrong.
little bit um yeah,
Uh,
it's looking like it.
hold on.
Yeah, Getting Away with, sorry, that's pretty stupid of me. The
Yeah,
album with Getting Away with Murder on it is called Getting Away with Murder on it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So those
so
are those are two kind of actually probably the reason why I associate these guys with the kind of emo pop punk thing is that they actually leaned into that when it became popular. Like one thing that Papa Roach has always been very astute of is following trends, whether or not you like that or not. This album came out at a time when new metal was in vogue, and they've kind of followed whatever is in vogue as their career has progressed. So now they're doing, I guess, is it more kind of electronic type stuff or
I don't really know. I mean, I've heard a song and you're like, oh, this sounds familiar, and then you check the track and you're like, oh wow, it's Papa Roach. They're still
Hmm.
going. I couldn't give you a track. That kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
I've just heard them. I may have even heard them on the radio at some stage, if memory serves me
They
correctly.
did. I know
Like
they
if they're
did they did some kind of a feature with some big rapper or something like that, I think, on one of their tracks.
I
But
mean, if
look,
they're making it onto Rock Nova Radio in Dublin, they're probably not metal anymore.
no.
That's
But look, the thing is, I suppose, in terms of what you were saying, that this is more kind of like a general type of album we're recommending here. I think you could slot in any major new metal album or of that ilk. So you could maybe put in Slipknot Volume 3 or whatever the one is with Duality on it. You could probably put, even though I don't really like them, but you could put in Korn, you could put in Disturbed, something that's got a bit of heaviness and melody in it as well.
I would actually be careful with that recommendation because some of those, like, I really don't like new metal, to be honest with you. I have a handful of new metal albums that I like, probably three of them at most. And then apart from that, I don't touch a genre with a 10-foot pole. So, and the reason for that is I find some
The
of it really
Godsmack
weird.
man turning elitist.
No, but what I mean is like I find Corn weird. Like that song
No, I'm not
Freak
a
on a
Korn
Leash that
fan.
everybody likes.
I don't get it.
I find Limp Bizkit obnoxious, like stuff like that where I would say I would lean into the rockier side of new metal. So Papa Roach is a good example. Disturbed is actually a very good example. Their early albums are a little bit on the softer side too.
Yeah.
The vocal lines are kind of, they're catchy. The lyrics, like David Draymond's a great singer.
Another band I'd
Just
recommend to people is Deftones. I'm a big fan of Deftones.
I've actually never listened to them.
White Pony is a very good album by them. But
Believe by Disturbed is a good one for that kind of suggestion as well. I think that's like 95 or something like that.
sure. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on to your next recommendation. I guess in order of what you would get somebody to move on to after Godsmack.
Yeah, so I mean it's funny because I would actually go, you're in a tough place now in that I would probably see, I'm looking at the Kill Switch Engage and suggesting you should go there, but I think I'm if I'm taking my hypothetical subject through down this journey, I'm hesitant to the point. I'm hesitant in waiting for the point where I would inject the harsh vocals. You really
Well, that's
want
the
someone
thing.
hook,
Like
line,
in
and
some ways, I mean, Killswitch Engage is a lot heavier than Black Sabbath.
I would say definite. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Particularly, and again, like the harsh vocals really are a step up. And I mean, that's that makes me sound like, particularly again, there are these metal veterans who probably think I'm some kind of an enormous pussy for saying that, but I remember the first time I heard harsh vocals was just to go on a tangent now. So there's a
Okay.
Trivium album called Ascendancy, which I nearly threw in for the kill. We're in the Kill Switch Engage
Yeah,
slot
that
here.
was one of the ones that I didn't like the first time I listened to it, but it did help get me into metal.
So I got really into that album through a single called "Dying in Your Arms," which the radio version has no harsh vocals on it, and that just happened to be the one I heard on like a YouTube video or something like that. Um, and I was like, this song is awesome, playing it over and over and over again. You know, at the time I thought it was the best song I'd ever heard or whatever, because I was like 11 or something like that. And I remember listening to one of the other singles off that album, which is like the Flies, which
Mm.
opens like it opens. There's no kind of foreplay in the intro. It's about 2 seconds of a guitar intro followed by some harsh vocals, and I was literally like, "What the hell is this? What am I listening to?" And it's one of those things where I listened to about 10 seconds of it, couldn't stomach it at all, and then like a week later, it was like, I'll give it another go, and I got 30
Yeah.
seconds into it, and I give it another go, and I go, so there is, you do need to dip your toes. So to answer your question, I would actually go back on myself here and say, if you loved your Godsmack, I would take Overkill by Motorhead as the next one, if it's coming from my albums. You
Okay.
could probably throw Ride the Lightning in there as an alternate, but I would go for something that still has. I wouldn't put Paranoid in just because it doesn't have as much of that like chuggy hard rock element to it.
Mm. Okay.
But I would say Ride the Lightning or Overkill by Motorhead would be the next I would introduce someone to. Because
Sure.
I would take them as a little bit heavier and they're way more palatable as well, or they're more true metal if you want to. That's true with a V.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I would definitely say Overkill before Ride the Lightning. Um, in terms of everything, speed, distortion, um, and it's closer to more of just a traditional rock song structure with things. But I mean, Jesus, what a fucking album! The
Stop.
best thing about this album is the balls that it takes to literally just play a song twice. Like the song Overkill, they just they just do a little bit of a fill in the middle and they just go right back to the start and play the song a second time because it's that good.
But like this is a very fun album. There's nothing like, I mean, and it's I find Motorhead very romantic when you listen to like Damage, particularly when you're a teenager, man. When you listen to something like Damage Case, where it's like nobody gets me, blah blah blah, but it's not
Yeah.
like self-indulgent kind of like slit my wrists and dye my hair black. It's like, angry teenager with ripped jeans and
Yeah.
the world, something to prove with the world. It's kind of empowering. Yeah, obviously, look, the main singles off this, like No Class, Overkill, Stay Clean, great, but there are little ones on this, like I love Limb from Limb.
Yeah.
That's a song I like. I like I'll Be Your Sister, I Won't Pay Your Price. This is
Yeah.
one of those ones where it's bangers from beginning, middle to end. I actually wouldn't. I would say Overkill is like a bit of a treat. So if someone was like, "Oh, I want to listen to this album," I would say don't listen to Overkill the song first. I would say start off with like I Won't Pay Your Price or Damage Case, and then
Mhm.
save that one as like one of the last ones you listen to, just because it's so special. And if you've bought into the album a little bit, and then you hear that song and you get that I won't call it a gimmick, but that hook where they basically restart the song halfway through it, you're going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
this is fucking awesome. You'll appreciate it more, I think. But you really can't go wrong with this one, to be honest with you. It's a great drinking album. It's a great driving album. It's a great training album. It's yeah.
Yeah, there's literally no bad songs on this. And it's kind of the album that just keeps on giving because, like you say, when I listened to this for the first time, the songs that I loved were ones like Damage Case and Stay Clean, and then I got into Overkill. But like now that I've come back to it more and more times, I recently only just got into Metropolis, and that was probably my least favorite song on the album when I listened to it the first time. And like Motorhead is a funny band because everybody knows Ace of Spades, and they kind of get pegged as like, you know, this dum kind of like rock band that's got like no real like intricacies or depth to it, but like they've written some like quite a wide variety of songs, given that they have stayed to their same style throughout, but like you can come back to the same Motorhead song, you know, 50 to 100 different times over the course of a few years and kind of get something new from it, and ones that you didn't appreciate all of a sudden become relevant, or you start noticing them in other things.
Well, the funny thing I think with Motorhead is, and I'm agreeing with you, is to the wrong person, they're a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
So like everybody, like you say, everybody knows Ace of Spades, nobody knows anything else, and they just presume they're like, they're Europe who wrote the Final Countdown, they're Scorpions who did
Yeah.
Rock You Like a Hurricane, they're whatever, but they actually
I
have
I
this
had
enormous.
no idea of the significance of Motorhead within the whole kind of metal sphere until I properly was a few years into it.
Yeah, 100%. Like they have this, they're like they have this enormous discography, which is consistent in the sense that they have no abhorrent albums. Look, they have good albums and they have good albums, they have all right albums, but they don't have bad albums.
Yeah.
Like they have some kind of empty ones. They have some fallow fields, but like yeah, I couldn't point to the Motorhead album and go, that's a piece of shit.
Yeah. And one thing you really have
Which
to
you
hand
could
it
with other.
you have to hand it to Motorhead in the
Sorry.
sense that one thing I was quite unaware of was just how tough it was for metal bands in the 90s, like particularly like the mid to late 90s. And for people who, obviously a lot of people listening to this wouldn't be into metal. But this thing happened in the mid to late 90s where grunge came in and Nirvana was really big. And then towards the end of that, new metal came in and kind of swept into the next kind of big trend. And so for classic metal bands, or even bands like Metallica or Slayer, who had been the new bloods for a while, like a lot of them just panicked and started totally changing their style to connect with the youth, and they changed it to a more kind of whatever was in trend at the time, like a more new metal type sound or even a slightly grungier sound. And Motorhead never did that. Motorhead always just said, no, fuck off. This is the type of music we play, and we're going to play it to the day we die. And they never deviated from the way.
Well, there's a couple of interviews with Lemmy, and I can't remember. I think there's two in my head, and I couldn't point you to them specifically, but there's one where he's in his 50s, where he's hasn't got his teeth fixed yet and still isn't dyeing his hair, so he's got the grey hair or whatever. And then there's one from, I think, just before the release of Bad Magic, which would have been not a terrible amount of time before he died. I think that album is 2013, and he would have died at the start of 2016 or the end of 2015. But
Yeah.
he's good there. These journalists are kind of like, so what can we expect from the new Motorhead album? And he's just kind of like, smoking a cigarette, drinking a Jack and Coke, and being like, look, fuck off. If you don't know what our albums sound like at this stage, he's like, he basically is like, look, you know what you're going to get with Motorhead. This is the music we make. Buy it or don't. I'm old. Kind of like, and they
Man's
can't be
like
faulted for
fucking
that.
20
Like,
albums deep at that point, at least.
look, Motorhead never did a Skrillex collab. That's all I can say.
No, no, you do have to hand it to them because apparently at that point in the 90s, like big bands were playing like small club shows again, and like just the whole thing it just flipped on its head. So no, they stuck with the way, and I think that this is a nice album to go into because, like you say, it's kind of probably, I might be wrong just from listening to a couple of tracks from Godsmack, a bit faster, and also would probably give you a little bit of a taste for something like a Black Sabbath because this is a more traditional heavy metal album.
Yeah, I would also say something about Motorhead albums that bar, some of they do have their dark tracks, but Motorhead albums tend to be quite fun.
Mm,
And like, I mean, Limb from Limb again, which is one of my favorite songs from this track. It's about trying to make a booty call when it's 3 in the morning and you're drunk and you're throwing rocks at a window you shouldn't be and hoping and you're going to have
yeah.
a successful outcome, and like a place where uh, we've all been there, kind of sending you up texts and stuff like that, and the kind of stuff that'll bring a bit of a smirk to your face when you listen to it. So,
Mhm.
and not in a bad way. I would say it's survived the test of time. This isn't Pleasure Slave by Manowar or anything like that.
Yeah, some things have aged
But
better than others.
yeah, it's tasteful in the sense that it's not reprehensible
Mhm.
by modern standards at least. So don't go canceling me for saying that. But yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons I would say that over like paranoid is like Paranoid and Ride the Lightning are a little bit like Black Sabbath, but particularly Aussie era Black Sabbath. There's always a little bit of a darkness to it, even on some of the more jovial tracks.
Hmm.
They feel a bit gloomy, and Ride the Lightning is just a bit serious. That would be my two. That would be my reason for taking Overkill first, and then
Yeah.
transitioning into those albums.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about like an album like Paranoid, it's actually kind of a bit of an artsy album. Like
Yeah,
there's songs like, Planet Caravan, which goes a lot
Fairies Wear Boots.
slower and gets very trippy. It's almost like a bit like Pink Floydy. And then Rat Salad is like this jazzy drum song. And it's really it's a very impressively varied album. I think it probably showcases the uh the variety of songwriting skills that Black Sabbath had better than just about any album.
Yeah, and Sabbath, like particularly Aussie era Sabbath, have some songs that I would actually rate as a bit, to some degree, a bit goofy.
Hmm.
Like Fairies Wear Boots.
And
Some of
that
the
is my
kind of
favorite song
Sabracadabra.
on this album.
Oh, it's a belter. No, no, don't get me wrong. It's a good song, but
Yeah,
it is a bit odd. It's a bit proggy. Sabracadabra, that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, no. So I would say Motorhead, and then I mean, if you want to talk about where to go next, see, this is that we're at the nexus now. We're at the point where you've listened to your kind of your mid 2000s rocky, heavy, blah blah blah. You've got a bit of a taste for something that would be considered more real metal in parentheses. And now you're at
Yeah.
a point where, depending on how you're feeling, you can go in a bunch of different directions. So I think this is where it gets interesting.
Well, I think we can rule out going straight to Gojira or Lamb of God.
Yeah, so I would say if it was me, and it would depend on how I was feeling. So if I listen to Motorhead, I'm like, crap, that classic metal, is pretty good. I would go to Ride the Lightning next, because
Okay.
I think it's closer to, like, I mean, it's similar to Motorhead in that it's fast, it's a little bit chuggy.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of simple to some degree, and but it's just a little bit, it hits a little harder, you know.
And
So if
Motorhead
it was
was a
me, I'm actually gonna go.
huge influence on these guys. So it's
Oh
kind
yeah,
of, I look at metal as like the evolution of metal from when it kind of started in the 70s through to today. Like each major album along the way, it's almost kind of a response to the one that came before it in terms of its influences. And the big thing that Metallica did was they basically just stepped up the pace of everything. Nobody had ever heard metal that was as fast as what they did on Kill 'Em All, but then they polished the songwriting on Ride the Lightning. And this, to me, a lot of people love Master of Puppets, and I think it's a great album. But for some reason, I just think this is their best album.
I agree. I agree 100%. Again, it's another one that's bangers back to back. For Whom the Bell Tolls is untouchable, like simply untouchable. It's one of the best badass songs of all time.
And just like such a
Creep of
fucking
Death
simple
as
song,
well.
but it's just crazy how much of a banger it is.
But I mean, look, it's an 8 song album, man, and they're like, apart from like Call of Cthulhu and some well, actually there's a few songs in here that are like the
Fade to
6 minute
Black
mark, but
is a bit slower.
it's nearly an hour long. It's 47 minutes here, but it feels like a quick listen. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It feels like a bit of a wham bam thank you ma'am album, but it's fucking
Mm.
great. It does just kind of, it is a bit of cold water thrown on your face. It's fast, it's heavy, it's simple. Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah. And what's interesting, actually, somebody made a very good point when they were comparing this to Master of Puppets, in that actually the formula of the song structure and the types of songs is almost the exact same on this and Master of Puppets, in that they both enter with probably the fastest song on the album. On Ride the
Yeah,
Lightning, it's Fight Fire with Fire. On Master of Puppets, it's Battery. Both amazing songs. I think, I don't know, I could be wrong with this, but I think the second song on both albums is the title track. So Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, both bangers. Um, they both have that kind of slow song, which kind of slow ballad, Fade to Black on this, and Master of Puppets. It's what's the slow? No, not Orion. Orion is kind of like the Call of Cthulhu version of Master of Puppets. What's the slow song on Master of Puppets?
isn't Orion on Master of Puppets?
Yeah, yeah, it is. But I feel like that's more kind of similar to
I mean that song
that's more similar to Call of
is.
Cthulhu, really.
I feel like
Hold
that
it up
song's a bit of a
here.
crescendo. It kind of slowly builds and then it katunks a bit. But
Well, I suppose there's elements of Welcome Home Sanitarium, and yeah, that's kind of a little bit slower. But anyway, they're both outstanding albums. I know Master of Puppets got a resurgence recently with Stranger Things.
oh yeah, I still haven't watched that.
Yeah, I need to get past the third season, which is a bit shit. But
Yeah, the third season made me want to peel my own skin off, which is why I haven't been able to
yeah,
stomach the,
but at the same time, I
you
feel like I
know.
couldn't just skip straight into the fourth one without knowing what's happening before. So, but look, I feel like, yes, technically either one of those albums is interchangeable, and that they're both fantastic and a gateway to thrash, and hugely influential on lots of other stuff that you go into that came after it. But I don't know, there's something about Ride the Lightning that just something about the character of this album. It just is better. I can't put my finger on what it is, but I just prefer it. A large part of it possibly is that I think James Hetfield's vocals are better on this album. I actually, even though it probably wasn't going to be a long-term sustainable strategy for him, I preferred those rougher, less polished vocals that were kind of beginning to come in a little bit, and a little bit of the yeah yeahs were starting to come in a little bit on Master of Puppets.
It's a great fucking album cover too, isn't it?
Mm, so fucking good. In fact, I bought
Yeah.
a T-shirt of this recently that was stolen on me, and I'm fucking annoyed about it. But I'm gonna get another one for sure.
What was her name?
Moving on to uh, where should we go from here? There's nothing more to say on Ride the Lightning. It's a great album.
No.
I don't know how you could hate this album, or at least not appreciate the songwriting prowess on it. Um, where would we
So
go from here?
if it was me, and it was only because you've got me all amped up for. See, I don't know if I'm injecting bias in now because you've got me all amped up about these albums. I just want to go listen to them now. Uh, I would
I'm
probably
gonna
see.
try to put in some of the songs, at a low level of audio in the background, and hopefully it won't get pulled for copyright.
So I want to go straight from Ride the Lightning to Painkiller, but I feel like we're not
Yes.
ready yet. I feel like we have to go to Paranoid before we go to Painkiller, but I want to go to Painkiller.
Right. I mean, is Painkiller, like a major
Painkiller
step
is a
up?
bit of a. I think it is. I mean, I'm actually not too sure of the track list of this album in terms of like the order. But like I mean, like Painkiller, the song, yeah, Painkiller, the song is the opening track. Like, can you
I think
imagine
the
you
vocals
jack
could
that
be a
up?
barrier. I don't think anything about the
Yeah,
instrumentals is radically different to Ride the Lightning, but I mean, you didn't.
I
I
mean,
don't think you really got into this album for a while, right?
yeah, I see. Like, I mean, like I liked, and maybe a better example is maybe you would have been you. I mean, the proverbial you. You would have been better off putting British Steel in there because who
Mm.
doesn't love breaking the law? Living after midnight, all that sort of stuff. But Yeah, I think it would actually be, maybe it would be one of those ones where I'm like, right, let's go to Painkiller, but let's not listen to Painkiller first. If you put on like Between the Hammer and the Anvil or One Shot of Glory or something like that as the first song someone listens to and they buy into it a bit, and then show them Painkiller or Hell Patrol or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just because Rob Halford goes higher than any human vocal has ever gone in the history of the human race
Right.
during that song for the entirety of that song. And if you're not ready for it, you're literally going to be like, what the fuck am I listening to?
I'm gonna say I feel like we have to go to Paranoid from here because I just think going to Paranoid at any point after this is such a step down in extremity.
Yeah, fair.
So I think that's the next logical jump. Okay,
Yeah,
so let's talk about that one. A lot of people would say this is Black Sabbath's best album. I mean, I feel like anybody who's a Sabbath fan has their own personal favorites because they do have
yeah,
some fairly significant different flavors on their albums, and there's ones with Dio on them. But if we're kind of containing it to the first batch of albums of the Aussie era, it's kind of between the first one, this uh Master of Reality, and Volume 4. But I do think this is probably the best collection of songs on one album.
I changed my mind between this and Black Sabbath, the self-titled album. Like
Yeah, I
one
was
day I'm
considering
like Black
picking
Sabbath
that.
is my favorite, and yeah,
One thing that turned me off it is that, you know, after you get past the title track, a lot of it could probably arguably be kind of put in the almost the classic rock kind of genre. And I feel like a lot of people would listen to that album and not really get its relevance to metal, whereas this is a little bit heavier.
yeah, no, I like. Well, it's funny you say that because I always say, and I don't pretend to be the first person to have this opinion, and we're getting way off topic here, but I think Black Sabbath is the first ever black metal song. You know, as in Black Sabbath the song.
With
Like
the
when you listen
Devil's
to the
Triad and
down
all that. Yeah.
the way it's tuned, the tempo, the content. It's an evil fucking song. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's a quick album as well. I like it though. I like the Wizard. I like NIB. I like the Evil Woman. You know.
Yeah, brilliant album.
But look,
Absolutely
yeah,
fantastic.
look. I would say, look, Paranoid is more. It's more important, and yeah, you could
Yeah.
argue that you wouldn't have Paranoid without Black Sabbath, but Paranoid is more important. It's the most recognizable Black Sabbath album. I don't care what anybody says about that. That's a fact.
Mhm.
So it's probably the best place to go when you're taking an absolute beginner in there. And like you say, Sabbath is one of those albums where people's favorite albums tend to be quite different.
Yeah.
Like one person likes this album and another likes that. I mean, I'm just parroting you. So yeah, I think you're right in saying Paranoid is the better album to pick, but is it the better album? We'd be talking all night about
Yeah.
whether
No, I
that's the
mean,
case
yeah,
or not.
it's not a Black Sabbath discussion. I do think that one thing that really lends to this being a good one for kind of a metal beginner is that there will be songs in here they recognize, like Iron Man. They may
War
have heard
Pigs.
some other ones before, like War Pigs. Yeah, like I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen like this phenomenon on YouTube of like guy reacts to metal song for the first time,
Yeah, yeah.
and everyone I've seen that reacts to War Pigs loves it because it's just, there's so many ebbs and flows to that song, and the lyrics are great, and it's got a great intro, and the
But
songwriting
also,
is amazing.
um, like for some reason, songs off this album get remixed a little bit. Like I was in to my shame, perhaps. I remember I was in Copperface Jacks at one stage,
Right.
which for people who don't know is it's a pretty desperate nightclub in Dublin. Its selling point is that it stays open later than anywhere
Yeah.
else. The floors are sticky, the
Nobody
drinks are
ever
awful.
plans to go there, should we say? You just end
No,
up there.
uh, No, it's not a yeah, that's exactly it. And I was listening to there was some dubstep dance electronic song going on, and then there
What?
was like a breakdown that had like it just breakdown like took a line from Iron Man, sampled it, and wubbed it, and I was like, fucking hell, this is Black Sabbath, you know what I mean? So it
Wow.
does seem to get injected into this. I'm sure Ozzy Osbourne did a song with Post Malone, you know.
Yeah, I saw that. All
Um,
right.
that's so I mean, it does. It would be recognizable in ways people probably wouldn't be able to necessarily pinpoint, but it would be recognizable.
Yeah, and you know the other important thing to realize about Black Sabbath is that pretty much any other band on here that you may end up liking was either directly influenced by them or was influenced by a band who was directly influenced by them.
So let's talk songs because I wanna get past the foreplay on this one and get into the meat of it.
All
Look, yeah, War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man. I would be more optimistic than you. I would say a lot of people have heard the three of those songs. They've definitely heard Paranoid. They've probably heard War Pigs, and I'm pretty confident they would have heard Iron Man as well. But
yeah,
the songs are look, those songs are great. They're fucking great songs. I love them. And maybe the reasons I like the other songs more is because I've heard those three songs so much. But
mm,
I'm a big like I love Fairies Wear Boots. I love Hand of Doom, and I love Planet Caravan. I would say my favorite Black Sabbath song might be Planet Caravan.
interesting. Okay, and for people listening, Planet Caravan is a slow song that I don't think anybody would categorize as metal. But it's a great song, and Pantera also did a very good cover of it as well.
Yeah, it would be between Planet Caravan and Fairies Wear Boots, which I guess are slightly different songs. But
Yeah,
I remember when we saw them live in
you
it
already
was on
nailed it.
the yeah, I think it was December of 2013 because I remember seeing them
They
twice
were
in about a
touring
six
the
month period.
13 album.
Yeah, and we saw them. I remember I saw them again on that tour at Hellfest in 2014. But I feel like the first gig we saw them at was around the winter time of 2013,
Yeah, it would have
and
been
they played very
November,
where.
December, I think.
Yeah, I just remember it was cold as balls.
Yeah,
Um, but they played Fairies Wear Boots live at that, and that was I just remember completely not expecting to hear that song, and it was absolutely spectacular.
yeah. One of the best. I mean, I have to
That
say
is
at
the
this
best show I've
stage,
ever been to.
that's still the best live show I've seen, and from lads who were, you know, I mean, they must have all been pushing 70 at that point,
Yeah, late 60s, early 70s.
which is
Except for the
amazing
drummer, obviously,
because
because
I went to
Bill
go,
Ward didn't go on that tour.
yeah, and the guy who stood on drums was exceptional, but like it's funny. I went to go see your favorite band live a few months ago, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and you know it was shit. And I'm a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, and I can admit it was shit. And the amount of people I talked to afterwards who were like, "Yeah, but what are you gonna do? Like they're in their 50s now," and I'm just like, Black
Have you
Sabbath.
seen Iron Maiden?
Yeah, have you seen Iron
Like, I mean,
Maiden, Black Sabbath, Rolling Stones? Like all those bands are kicking their ass and they've got at least 20 years on them. So don't give me this they're in their 50s bullshit. And that show that Sabbath did was still hands down not only the best live show I've seen from a performance point of view, but Jesus, the sound was on point. Whoever was doing their sound is, a perfectionist.
no, that I distinctly remember walking out of that gig being like, "Fucking hell!" Was 8 years ago, so I was 20. I was like, I'm 20 years old, and I've just been to the best concert I'll ever have been to. I was like, I
All
can't
downhill
think
from
of
here, boys.
anything that will ever top that. And I mean, it's only 8 years later, but I have yet to be proven wrong.
Yeah. And they ain't getting any younger either. So that was a golden opportunity. Okay, anything else to say about Paranoid?
No, look, if you've gotten this far, it's worth listening to. that's
Yeah,
that's probably the way
definitely.
to go.
You've
So
definitely
we've all.
heard
I
the
mean,
main
I guess
ones.
if we're going to Painkiller next, I might have kind of killed that a little bit because I have talked about it a little bit.
You've talked. Ah, no, there's still plenty to talk about with that. Would you go Painkiller before Kill Switch?
I would actually, so Kill Switch, I would actually leave on the back burner. If it was me, I would go to either Painkiller or Vulgar Display of Power. Maybe Vulgar Display of Power
Uh,
if you're looking to freshen up a little bit.
okay, interesting, because we do have some shouty vocals for sure on Vulgar Display of Power, but they're probably a bit more familiar than the high pitches that Halford hits.
So I think, yeah. So the reason for that is, I think I would actually say the most, and it's obscure is the wrong word, but definitely the most like true metal in quotation marks albums here are The Way of All Flesh and Painkiller, is in the ones where you really need to be into it to be into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think Vulgar Display of Power has some songs that are going to be palatable. Lamb of God, yeah, well, they have the harsh vocals. Randy Bly is quite digestible, so I think people would find him less offensive than some of the harsh
Mm.
vocalists. So I would say like those two are the ones that I would be like, you really need to be into the foundation before you try to get into these albums and appreciate them properly, because they go, and again, like Painkiller is like literally one of the best songs ever written, but it's the problem track on that album when you're trying to convince someone into metal, just because it is very out there. It's heavy. The vocals are extremely high.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So
Okay, well, I'm
Vulgar
happy
Display
enough
of
to move
Power,
to. Yeah, let's move to Vulgar Display of Power then.
sure.
Um, okay, so you have Black Sabbath kind of kick off the genre in the 70s. Then as the 80s progress, you have bands like Metallica come in and speed things up a bit, and well, a lot, and you know branches of more extreme metal come in. And then in the 90s, Pantera do this weird thing where they kind of unlock like forgive the pun for fans, a new level of heaviness, and they do it somehow without going any faster, but with these really chunky, down-tuned, and not like massively down-tuned, probably less down-tuned than say like Papa Roach, but they have this phenomenal guitar player in Dimebag Darrell, and they inject this groove and rhythmic down-tuned guitar playing that's extremely tight. By all accounts, from people who've seen them live, one of the tightest bands of all time in terms of just how perfectly synchronized they were in executing these songs. And then you have Phil Anselmo on vocals, who kind of was not like a hugely different vocalist from what was going on in grunge, in the sense that he managed to mix clean vocals with more harsh vocals than what we're going on in grunge, but there's a bit of clean and there's plenty of harsh going on in Pantera. And one of my favorite bands of all time. I'd probably rank them in my top three for sure. And I think this is a nice introduction to the slightly more extreme side of things.
Yeah, particularly when I'm looking at the track list for this album now, and like, because I'm a, again, I'll be crucified for this. I tend to listen to albums on shuffle, even in the iPod days, even in the Walkman days. I would listen to albums on shuffle. I wouldn't
Like
play a
I
lot of
kind
it.
of think the whole like albums are meant to be listened to, and their track listing is a little bit overplayed unless it's something that's like a themed album.
So I know all the songs on this album, but their order escapes me sometimes. And one of the things that I think is good about this album, from an introducing someone to metal kind of perspective, is it gets heavier as it goes along. So like Mouth for War and A New Level are heavy, but they're pretty, like Mouth for War in particular, is pretty, it's mostly clean vocals. It's just a little chuggy ride for 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Same with A New Level. Walk is a little bit heavy. I would like, it's
God, I
all
gotta
heavy, but
say, I
like,
love Pantera, but I'm so sick of that song.
it's a good example though of like one of the things I think, like, I mean, people revere Dimebag Darrell, and rightly so. But he seems to have had this kind of serve the song mentality.
Mhm.
Whereas you've got this guy who's an extremely competent and technical guitarist, and his most memorable riff is as easy to learn as "Smoke in the Water." You know,
Yeah.
ba-da-da-da, 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 ba-da-da, ba-ba, ba-ba-da-da,
Yeah.
ba-ba, ba-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, like that kind of. And so, like, you know, that's where it's like, yeah, I could do something more technical, but this just fucking sounds good. And, you know, I think it's a good example of probably why this band was popular, because you got great musicians who were just trying to make good music instead of show off they were great musicians.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a good solo on that song, but I think there's also a little bit of like just it was a sign of the times as well, and that like people were ready for something different that was a little bit more rhythmic and groovy. And as much as I love Pantera, like they definitely had a fan base who loved the kind of tough guy uh
Oh
character
yeah.
Phil Anselmo portrayed, and like the lyrics of that song are basically all about just having beef with some other guy.
Yeah, but 5 minutes alone as well, you know, which isn't
Yeah.
on this album, but
Bleep your girlfriend last night.
oh, that's is that not Good Friends and a Bottle of Pills?
Oh,
That's an
sorry, you're right. Yeah,
experience.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect Love
that's an
is a different beat.
experience. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's we don't need to get into that song. It's not on this album. It's not becoming of us.
No.
The Great Southern Trendkill is a complicated album.
Yeah, no, this is
Um,
this is a good introduction to Pantera, I think.
yeah, sure. I mean, I'm gonna misremember here, but it was something like this might have been the only metal album to go platinum in the 90s, or it was the only metal album
No,
to
it
go
was
number one in the charts at the 90s. Was
their
it
their
something like that?
highest charting album, and I think it was the only time. I think it was the only time in the '90s that a metal album went number one was Far Beyond Driven. I think,
Sorry, I'm getting the two mixed up. Yeah,
which
sorry,
actually
that's
is
me.
surprising to me because I really
You think this is a
don't
better album?
like that album as much as other people do.
There are singles on it that I prefer to the singles on this, but I prefer this as a complete album.
Yeah, sorry. I
So
suppose
like,
the main thing that surprises me about that album being the one to go number one is that it's quite heavy and quite. There's a lot less
it's,
melody going on in that album than this one.
some of them, like 5 Minutes Alone and I'm Broken, are pretty straightforward songs.
Yeah.
As is and the Planet Caravan cover is on here. I like that song "Use My Third Arm" as well. Shedding Skin, yeah. Some of this is, and actually I got that wrong. I said "Good Friends and a Bottle of Pills" is on the Great Southern Trendkill. It's actually on Far Beyond Driven, but yeah, yeah, they're both good albums. I like Pantera.
Yeah. I suppose the point about this album is that it's probably I would say this album more than anything else has influenced metal that has, let's say, like mainstream popular metal bands that have come from 2000s onwards. um so the whole kind of like shouting slash screaming slash clean singing combo, and then the down tuning, the rhythmic groovy kind of riffs, and the fact that Pantera also kind of changed the lyrical themes towards more kind of personal relationships and emotions and stuff like that. Whereas, if you're looking at something like
It's less fantasy.
Painkiller, it's all about like just abstract ideas of heroism and fighting a battle or whatever. But I think this is an extremely influential album, and if you could really get into anything that's big post 2000, I mean, I would imagine bands like Killswitch and Gage took quite a bit of influence from this album.
Yeah, I have to agree with you in that. Like, no, it can't be said for I think all metal, and particularly when you go really deep into obscurity in say the 80s, because there was a death metal presence and stuff like that in the
Yeah,
80s,
totally.
you
Yeah.
know, and some of that stuff. I mean, death metal is a bad example because death metal, and we'll get there when we get there, is can just be a bit fucking dorky, to be honest with you, in its lyrical themes. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree in that like like a lot of that metal is it's a little bit adolescent in the themes that it deals with, where it is like playing with your sword and your mom calling you in for dinner when you're doing Painkiller, or like being a sleazy 14-year-old teenager or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the themes definitely mature a little bit. They become a little bit more like maybe a man in his mid or early 20s. But yeah, I agree with you in that. Particularly with I think this album and 94 is when Far Beyond Driven came out, so there was some metalcore emerging then. But I think it kind of gave permission for metalcore to happen
Yeah.
to some degree. And the vocals, which are this kind of this transition between clean and harsh vocals, which is sometimes not so affectionately called by people, say it the good cop bad cop routine. Where you'll do harsh vocals on the verse and then you'll clean sing the chorus.
Yeah.
Which I like that term. But yeah,
Which is
that's
funny because that's actually the opposite of what Pantera were doing. Usually the clean vocals would, if they were going to come, they were going to come in the verses, and then the harsh vocals are in the chorus.
Well, also Phil Anselmo has this talent that is beyond me. You hear it in Pantera, but I think I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. So I think a more simple way of hearing it is actually on the First Down album, Nola. But he has this capacity to transition between clean and harsh vocals like across syllables, which
Incredibly
makes
hard to
like
do.
we've played music before. I wouldn't say we've played in a band, but having run on the vocal side of things, like trying to do that is really hard.
Yeah.
And like the fact that he can do it and he can carry it quite well live, is extremely impressive. When you listen to the metalcore, those and I would imagine that's part of the reason why, is that it takes an exceptional person to be able to do it well. But the transition between clean and harsh vocals into more defined periods is maybe partially due to the fact that it's technically easier. It's easier
Mhm.
to continue a harsh vocal when you're singing a harsh vocal, and it's easier to maintain a clean vocal when you're maintaining a clean vocal.
Yeah.
That transition is a little sticky sometimes. So particularly trying to do it so rapidly, and so like a lot of Pantera songs have like this back and forth to the vocals, like across sentences and within words, even again, like I said, across
Mhm.
syllables. So that can be, yeah, so I guess it would have injected the idea that you can mix the two vocal styles, but it had to be dumbed down to some extent.
Yeah. I find it funny how many bands albums like this have influenced that, you know, Phil Anselmo would just fucking hate. Like he does not like any
Oh
of the
yeah, yeah,
metal
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
at all, and it's been so heavily influenced by Pantera.
Yeah, but like that's
But
the way
I
it
mean, the
goes,
same could
isn't
be
it? You hate
said
your
for like I'm
kids.
sure the guys in Slayer and Metallica aren't really into black and death metal, you know?
I never really know about that. Yeah, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. They have to. But yeah, I can't see Lemmy listening to Dark Throne. In fairness,
Yeah. So,
uh,
um,
I doubt he was smoking a Marlboro Red and popping on the old Transylvanian Hunger in the
yeah,
bathtub,
definitely not a good place to start for a beginner. Right, we've done Pantera. So the only albums we have left here are Painkiller, Kill Switch, and oh, we still got Gojira and Lamb of God. Okay, so where do we go from
I'm
here?
quite determined to leave Gojira to be my last album.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think personally it should go Painkiller, Kill Switch, Lamb of God, Gojira.
Yeah, I'd be in agreement.
Okay, where we at? We're at Painkiller, yeah.
Faster than a bullet, terrifying scream. He's half man and half machine.
So like that's the
Etc.
kind of stuff that's gonna really make a lot of people be like, what in good fuck is going on?
But that song is and I actually don't mean this in a derogatory way. I mean it quite honestly. It's very special.
Yeah.
It's very, very, And I do make this joke regularly to our mutual friend Knox, that I feel like, I think Rob Halford was in his perhaps late 30s when he wrote that song. So it would have been like probably at the peak of his vocal capacity. And I jokingly say he wrote that, recorded it and was like, Jesus, that's a great song, and has regretted writing it ever since, because the guy is in his 70s, and you see him
Yeah.
literally when he has to play it live. If you look up recent versions, he's literally static, folded over,
Yeah,
looking like he's
he's
about to
hunched over
die.
the mic like that.
Like, I can't imagine. And look, he's still doing the song justice. It doesn't
We
sound the
saw them
same, but it
live at
sounds good.
Hellfest this year, and they were the best band we saw there. Well, Dan was up there too, but I mean, for their age, it was fucking amazing. Um,
No,
I
he can absolutely still perform it, but
yeah,
God love him, I feel bad for a 7 year, like, and that's one of those must play songs on a set as well. They can't get away with not playing it. So
no, no,
fuck.
no. It's like the Enter Sandman of Judas Priest. Um, yeah, I think this album is it's basically to me like the last great kind of traditional heavy metal album. And it kind of signals the death of the genre as well. Like, as you're coming into the 90s, bands like Pantera were starting to come up, and grunge was becoming more popular. And our friend Knox makes a great point that, like, in the lead up to this in the late 80s, everything was basically becoming about speed, and it was all about thrash and trying to play things faster. And this was kind of like Judas Priest being like, okay, you want to play fast? This is as fast as we can go. And like, there's guitar solos on this that even they can't match live the same way that they managed to hit on this recording. And I think this is like the most like metal album that I've listened to in terms of like just the stereotypes of metal and the hallmarks of the genre. Like, you've got this like blisteringly fast paced drums, this like soaring vocals that are just incredibly high, like glass shattering vocals from Halford. Beautiful guitar tone that is extremely heavy, and like crazy solos, and then the songs are all bangers from front to back. This is just like one of the best albums I've ever listened to in my entire life.
No, it's perfect. Like I said, it's perfect. It's perfect from top to bottom and from bottom to top. No, look, I like, no criticisms, no complaints. Yeah, it is. It's one of those ones where it's just like, it's metal, and it's peak beer metal. You know what I mean? You can't. This album was written to be played while you're sitting in a dive bar drinking a cold beer, wearing a leather waistcoat, like,
Yeah.
it's no. And I mean, there's songs on this, like, oh look, I love Painkiller. Painkiller is a phenomenal performance, but I get more enjoyment out of probably the less extra songs on this. I like One Shot at Glory, Hell Patrol. Although Hell Patrol has its moments, particularly in the vocal department, in terms
Definitely.
of Halford still gets pretty high there.
For me, it's my
Between the Hammer
hands
and the
down.
Anvil.
Yeah, I think that is a fucking amazing song. Like the intro to that song is so good. Just like the build up of the drums, the lyrics are so good in that song. That's one of my favorite pre songs, hands down.
No, it's great. Yeah, and like I said, it's just. I think this is an album that's designed to be enjoyed with friends. It's kind of you can listen to it by yourself, but you won't get the full experience. Unless you and two of your mates are being stupid and banging heads and shaking each other and whatever. Kind of.
Yeah, great training
Yeah,
album
no,
as
it's good.
well.
Yeah, for sure. The
Um,
lifting.
All Guns Blazing got me through some pretty tough CrossFit workouts back in the day.
That's a time in my life I'm not going back to. Particularly not
um,
with my readily acquired drinking habit.
yeah, not too rewarding for the endurance focused sports. But look, this album, if you like this album, you're gonna like a lot of the traditional heavy metal stuff. You probably could get into a bit of Iron Maiden. You'll like a lot of the stuff like Dio, which is another, standard heavy metal band that's got an amazing vocalist that hits those higher ranges. And probably is fast enough that you could even start to get into a little bit of like thrash and stuff like that, like Megadeth or some of Metallica's other albums like Master of Puppets or Injustice for All. It's such a quintessentially metal album. There's a lot of directions you could go in from this, I think.
Yeah, like I mean, look, we're
This is heavy. It's like it's a heavy album.
oh yeah, but it's just like I mean, it's one of those things where like you and I would understand it when I go, oh, this is like a metal album, or like this is a heavy metal album, and someone, I confess that must be, or I accept that must be confusing to somebody listening who's like, sorry, I thought all of these were heavy metal albums, and you're like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
look,
but
that's fair.
they're all metal, but then there's like heavy metal, and
Yeah.
this is like the best heavy metal album, and you would um,
I suppose
understandably
what
be
I'm
like,
saying is
not
I'm
all,
thinking
but
of the
I
the
think that's one
stereotypical
of those
hallmarks
colloquialisms, you know.
of what kind of defines the genre, and this kind of ticks all of those boxes.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no,
Like I
it's
mean,
a
if you
PH of
take like
seven,
Papa Roach, yes, they've got heavy riffs, but there's a bit of rapping in there, and there's some more kind of melodic stuff, and kind of like more, should we say, like more normal kind of lyrical content. Painkiller, like he's literally singing about everything you see on that album cover there. It's some
Yeah.
kind of metal warrior guy on a motorbike riding over the pits of hell, basically, or Armageddon. I'm pretty sure the theme of the album is just Armageddon on Earth, basically.
But like with a lot of like this album is like, riding a fucking Harley Davidson down Route 66, smoking a cigarette, kind of like it's not it's male fantasy stuff, kind of,
Yeah, it's tongue in cheek. Like a lot of it's like Manowar or Motorhead. It's just dudes being
Well, actually,
bros.
it's funny when I made that comment, must have been 15, 20 minutes ago now, when I was talking about some of these classical albums having kind of like this adolescent fantasy. If you want to hear a band that's the ultimate, I say they're the worst and the best band of all time, Manowar. Like they are the peak of that adolescent fantasy. As an
Yeah.
example, they're absolutely terrible and one of my favorite bands of all time.
It's a band who's not afraid to venture into cringe in the name of writing a good song.
They'll double down because they will never acknowledge, they would never admit to being cringe, but then they'll have album covers where they're all wearing loincloths, kind of like.
Women worshiping them at the feet, and he's holding a sword.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to listen to, I've mentioned the song already on this podcast, but if you want to get an example of a metal band escaping cancel culture, listen to Pleasure Slate by Manowar, because they've really gotten
Yeah.
away with that one.
They're like the Donald Trump of metal in the sense that they kind of set the tone from the outset that, like, this is just who we are as people, and this is our vibe. And, you kind of have to admit to yourself that you clearly didn't care about this for decades because we've been singing about this stuff for so long.
Yeah, fair enough. No, yeah, but anyway, we've strayed
We've
from the
milked we've
path.
milked the painkiller discussion as far as it can go. Listen to it, and I'd say if you don't like it, you're probably not going to like a lot of the standard heavy metal stuff like Dio and Iron Maiden and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I would say you need a bit of a you need a bit of practice before you try to play that game. You know what I mean? You need to have digested a few albums before you try to get into Painkiller.
Yeah.
I wouldn't take it as a first stop shop, but yeah, if you particularly even if you like Ride the Lightning, you'd probably like Painkiller. Even if you hadn't listened to any of
Yeah.
the other albums we're suggesting here.
Actually, and one thing I would say is that as we're getting further along here, in, depths of departures from mainstream music, you probably will find that you won't enjoy some of these albums very much the first time that you listen to them. Certainly by the time we get to Gojira, I didn't like them the first time that I listened to them, and then you're kind of like, well, I'll give it another go, and oh yeah, that riff sounded kind of cool, and that heavy part was kind of nice, and it could be the third or fourth time that you listen to them that it properly clicks with you, so if you're listening, just keep that in mind, that not everything is going to be your favorite album of all time, or one that you really love the first time you listen to it. In fact, a lot of mine weren't like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess that, I mean, we'll get to the Wave of Flesh when we get to the Wave of Flesh. No, I like that album. I think that album's a banger from the first day I listened to it, but
Totally, yeah.
neither here nor there. Yeah,
Well, it
but
depends. Like,
so
I listened to that before I had heard, you know, other music of that ilk. So it was kind of one of my first exposures to that kind of heavier type of music.
but will we go to this is
I
a
think we
favorite album
go,
of mine now, I must admit. Alive or Just Breathing.
yeah, I think we go there and then Lamb of God after that. So Alive
So
versus Breathing. I like Kill Switch Engage, and I listened to a song off this again on the drive home tonight. And yeah, I confess I was bopping my head along to, what is the main song of this album that would have come up for me?
was probably My Last Serenade. That was the one that was on
Yes.
MTV and
That
all that sort of stuff.
that was it. Yeah, I like that song. That was good. And I do like a lot of Kill Switch Engage songs. I just haven't really listened to this album. So what is it about this album that made you put this down? Because they've gone through a lot of different
So
vocalists, right?
no, they've technically only had two. But I put this album down because I fucking love it. That's why.
Fair enough.
I mean, I'm quite self-confessed in that I love metalcore. Which is
Mhm.
that's a bit of a black mark for some people, but I love it, and this is probably one of my favorite metalcore core albums. And Jesse, so Killswitch Engage's most iconic vocalist and most iconic album is The End of Heartache, which I think came out in around 2004. And that was Howard Jones, who has he's got quite a recognizable baritone voice. Um, but
Yes.
their original vocalist was this guy, Jesse Leach, and he was with them for two albums. Then Howard Jones was with them for three albums, and then Jesse Leach came back in like 2011 or 2012 and has been with them ever since for three albums since.
So hold on,
So
not to interrupt you, but the ones that I know are the self-titled album. That's Howard Jones, right?
they have two self titled albums.
What?
Their first album is a self titled album, and then
Okay, no, I'm talking about the one with like the leopard on the front.
the 2009 one with Howard Jones.
Yeah,
That's
and
probably
then
received as their worst album.
really,
I
there's
don't
a couple of
mind it. Yeah,
songs
I don't mind it.
on
It's all
there.
right.
And then the other one that I've listened to the most is Disarm the Descent, but that's not Howard Jones, is it?
That's the first album from when Jesse Leach came back.
Okay, right. Yeah, yeah. I like those both. I think I prefer Jesse Leach though.
Yeah, me too.
Howard Jones doesn't seem to do as much of like the metalcore screechy vocals.
Well, what I like about metalcore is it's an awful name for a genre, but so I'm very into, this, that I'm very into a type of punk called hardcore, which is like, it's an odd one. It's probably, again, it's inspired by like these Metallicas and Slayers and thrash bands, but then it has a punk element to it. And some of the early bands there are like Black Flag, Bad Brains, Minor Threat, that sort of stuff,
Mhm.
which are a little more punky. But what you got this kind of, I would call it like a co-evolution. And again, I said this earlier when I was talking about Vulgar Display of Power, which I think was really the album that gave permission for this type of music to kind of exist, where if you listen to early hardcore, it's got the characteristics of metal that it shares are it's a little bit chuggy and it's quite fast, but the vocals in particular are still quite punk orientated, and that they're that kind of melodic, shouty kind of vocal And then what you happened is you got some bands that kind of tuned into a more metal tuning. So they had that kind of distortion element to them that would be like probably more stereotypically metal. And then you got this integration of like more metal style harsh vocals, which are a little bit more, I would say they're a little bit more fanciful. They sound less like a clean vocal. Like a hardcore harsh vocal would be more like a shout, where like a metalcore vocal would be more like a traditional kind of death growl or something like that. And these albums started coming out in the mid to late 90s. You know, you see some stuff from In Flames, and this album, which I think is like 98 or something like that, should actually be here. But why I like this album is it's 2000 actually. Sorry. Why I like this album is I think it's very balanced. And Jesse Leach would have come from a more hardcore background, so it's got those elements in that it's quite raw, it's quite fast, but it's yeah, it's raw, it's fast, but it's still heavy, and it's got enough of that metal element to be captivating to me, which is why I like it. It's probably one of the first albums where you see a really good introduction of something that I personally preference, which is this good cop, bad cop routine that I've mentioned before, where you see quite defined periods of harsh vocals and clean vocals that kind of loop over each other. And he's a great vocalist as well, which is why. And there's a lot of like this is one of those albums
Yeah.
that is, if you're into this type of music, is bangers back to front.
It's
All
also
that stuff.
arguably got more of the harsh vocals than maybe more harsh vocals than Pantera.
Yeah, well, again, that I think it's just structured differently in the way that, like I said,
It kind of
when you
feels like the
separate
harsh vocals go harsher, but the cleans are more melodic and soft than Pantera.
clean vocals in metalcore now, it's changed a little bit, but clean vocals in metalcore tend to be quite simple. They're not hard to emulate. They're simple
Mhm.
melodies. They don't go too high. They don't go too low. That was actually one of the I would say one of the things about Howard Jones, who's the second vocalist for Killswitch Engage, that helped catapult them is he's a really fucking good singer. As in,
Yeah.
like his clean vocals are very classical, they're technical, and they're good. He could go higher than most vocalists in the genre, which would have made him stand out. The clean vocals here are, to be honest with you, particularly in these earlier albums, like people are still figuring out how to make these harsh vocals work. And so a lot of the time you're actually injecting clean vocals as a mechanism for allowing you to rest in between periods of having these harsh vocals in here.
Mhm.
Why I picked this album and why I think having a metalcore album is useful in terms of getting someone into metal is, like I've said, probably at the start, I think one of the biggest barriers for entry is that there's people like look, whenever you talk about like, oh, I like heavy metal, people go, oh, those vocals are awful, it sounds like somebody's taking a shit, or blah, blah. I can't hear I don't understand what those guys are saying,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know why you're from Texas, but um so what I like about metalcore is the harsh vocals tend to be more they're more clear. You can hear the lyrics better, and they're easier to follow. The melodies are a little bit simpler, so it makes them a little bit catchier. So it's a good way to introduce yourself to harsh vocals as a means of going, oh, well, I like the screaming on Killswitch Engage. Maybe The End of Heartache would have been a better album, but I prefer this one. And then when you come to a Gojira or even something that goes heavier or kind of into more obscurity, like you say, more traditional death metal or black metal or something like that, you're kind of prepared for it. You're more willing to give it a chance because
Yeah.
there are harsh vocals that you enjoy. That would
Yeah.
be, and also the good cop bad cop thing gives you a bit of a break in the middle of the song, so it's not harsh vocals from start to finish.
Hmm. Yeah. I would agree with that. I think my experience with listening to bands like Trivium would have been the band for me like that, or System of a Down, that had a mix of clean and harsh, and you start to play the ones that have the majority clean vocals enough that they kind of start to wear a bit thin, and you're like, well, what else is on this album? And you're like, okay, I can kind of get down with that a little bit. And then it starts to become a thing where you actually start looking for the harsher vocals on more of their albums, and that leads you to things that have got all harsh vocals on it. So I think that is probably a good segue into Lamb of God, because for the most part, pretty much all of Lamb of God songs, except for sections where Randy Blythe is doing his kind of like spoken word poetry of the way of masculine honor or whatever. It's pretty much just Randy Blythe doing harsh vocals. And look, I love Lamb of God.
That's Omerta. That's not on this album, is it?
No, I don't know. Is there parts in this
It's a
album where he
good
does any
song
cleans?
though.
Yeah, it's a great song. Yeah, look, I
No, no,
went.
I think that stuff comes a lot later. Lamb of God are actually a band that I've
Omerta is
fallen
before
out of
this
love
though,
with.
isn't it? I think that's before this album.
Uh, Let me have a look here. I'm not actually sure, to be honest with
I'm
you.
pretty sure this is their second album as Lamb of God before obviously they were Burn the Priest before, but
Have you ever actually listened to the Burn the Priest album? It's pretty good. It's heavy, but it's pretty good.
I haven't, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, Omerta is off Philadelphia. You're right.
So I think they're
And
both.
this is their third album. Sorry, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay. Um I I I think this and Omerta are both up there as their best albums. I went with this one because I think it's got some more kind of catchy hooks in it. Redneck was a song that really got me into the heavier side of things in metal. You can definitely hear the Pantera influence on this album in terms of the guitar playing. Randy Blythe, I would say, has a fairly distinctly different approach the vocals to Phil Anselmo. But one thing that Randy Blythe does very well, even though he is singing as harsh as potentially some death metal vocalists, is, you can pretty much hear everything Randy Blythe is saying in all of these songs. Like, it's very well enunciated. And I think that this was a pretty key album for me getting into harsher vocals because you can hear everything he's saying. The songs are catchy. It's not a very rapid departure from something like Vulgar Display of Power. Um, and yeah, it's a fucking great album. Loads of bangers on this. Huge fan of Descending and Black and the Cursed Sun. Obviously, Redneck is kind of the main single off this, but all the songs on this album are great.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that Randy Blythe is he's a very coherent vocalist, even though he they do clean vocals now, but it took them really a few albums for those to come through. As in, like I think you're talking, it would have to be. I think the first was Storm on Drag, the first album that came out after he was released from Czech prison.
I
I
think
think that was the
Resolution, or was that beforehand?
I think there is a song Set to Fail, which is their first one that has kind of
So
clean
Resolution
vocals
was
on it.
2012, but I think that was before he went to prison.
So Wrath, which is their 2009 album, has Set to Fail, which kind of has some clean vocals on it, but they're brief and they're only in that one song. But yeah,
Okay.
so you're talking about 2012. This is a band whose first album came out in I think about 2000. It came out in 2004, so they've been a band for 8 years before. Well, longer than that if you count for the Priest, but
Sorry, I was Ashes of the Wake, by the way. Sorry, not Omerta is not the name of the album. Omerta is just, the main song of that.
Yeah, but I actually think my favorite album off. Now we're going back and forth here, which is going to get confusing. But going back to Sacrament, which is the album you suggested here, my favorite song off that album is "Walk with Me in Hell." And actually, one of the things I
Hmm.
like about Randy Blythe's vocals is, particularly in their earlier albums, he transitions between um he does a bit of the Phil Anselmo thing that he goes kind of into that weird screechy high range a bit, but he has some songs where I find the vocals a little bit meandering. Walk with Me in Hell is a good example, and I like the experience that brings. Um, so I would say that's actually probably my favorite. Redneck is fine, but it's one of those songs that I listened to like 15,000 times when I was
Yeah.
like 13 years old, and I kind of can't really listen to it anymore. I've
Yeah,
kind of played
it's
it.
it's
It's not that
so
it's a bad
simple that
song.
it
I'm
gets
just
overplayed too easily.
Yeah, I've just heard it too many times. It's not that I don't like it. It's just that I've kind of beaten it to death a little bit.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, that's not really a comment on the song. I've just literally heard it too much. I like Black and the Cursed song as well. It's a good song. This isn't an
Sorry,
album of
Black and
theirs
the
that I.
Cursed Sun does have a clean on it because it goes into there's a bridge, and then in the end part he starts doing that, you know, is there still hope for us? Hell no.
Um, okay, maybe I'm not as familiar with that song as I claim to be, but I look. I prefer Ashes. I'm more familiar with Ashes of the Wake than I am with this song, or with this album. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
um, Redneck, Walk with Me in Hell, and Black and the Cursed Sun are probably the three tracks that I'm confident saying that I know quite well.
Mhm.
Um, and that's it really. So I can't really comment on the rest of the album. But look, Lamb of God are pretty fucking good. You can't go wrong with the first three albums. If you're looking for something that, if you've listened to that Killswitch Engage album, you like it, and you want something that is a little bit more, it's a little deeper down the rabbit hole. One of those three albums, I would actually say go with Ashes of the Wake first, but they're probably interchangeable in terms of the experience they're
Yeah,
going to give you. I just think the songs are better on Ashes of the Wake.
I'd agree. I'm biased because this was what got me into Lamb of God and what was kind of a big stepping stone for me. But Ashes of the Wake is a perfectly good album to slot in there instead. So yeah, I think that's a good one to do as our second last, and then we can transition to our last album now, which is Gojira, The Way of All Flesh, is what you went with.
Yeah, baby. Yes, I did. Um, so I picked this Gojira, a funny one, because, and actually, funny enough, Randy Obly is
Rendio Blade.
it's his Connemara cousin. I know his father well. Um, he actually has a cameo on this album. That's neither here nor there. I like this one because, like, particularly at this stage in their career, Gojira are still probably technically a death metal band, and I would say death metal is one of the least accessible subgenres of metal. And I
Yeah.
say that as someone like I myself would be struggling to find bands and albums that I like, and I would be
Mhm.
someone who's into some, obscure metal. So, like, I mean, I think, but it's a good platform for launching yourself into those more fringe subgenres, like the
Definitely.
death metals, like the black metals. Um, and this is a gentle introduction to that world a little bit, and it's kind of one of those things where perhaps if you like this album, there are places, that you might be able to kind of go on a journey into these more fringe regions and find something there that you like, because while I don't like a lot of music that's on the periphery of that of metal, in terms of say death metal or black metal or something like that, those bands are quite interesting when you find ones that you do like. It's never boring. It can be, when it hits the right spot, it's very unique and it's very interesting to listen to. So if it is something you can latch on to, it's worthwhile. And I just think this album, particularly for me, this personally, was something that was able to give me a platform to try and explore that a little bit. Um, all the songs on it are belters, and that's all I really have to say about it.
Yeah, like it is a nice introduction to that kind of next step into the more extreme side of metal, like death metal. It has some aspects of that genre, like some blast beats. The vocals are a lot more low and guttural than what you're going to get on something like Killswitch Engage or Pantera. It's very instrumentally driven, which is a major hallmark of the extreme metal genres. And I think there won't be too many people who will listen to this for the first time and love it if it's their first introduction to something as heavy as this. I appreciate you were saying you loved this album the first time you listened to it, but it is a pretty big step up, and I would say to go into it with an open mind, be prepared that there might be songs that you like more than others. One thing that I find interesting about this album is the kind of order of the songs that they picked, in that, you know, they, to me anyway, all of my favorite songs on this album come towards the end. Ouroboros, don't get me wrong, is a good song. Toxic Garbage Island is good. But my favorite songs off this album are The Art of Dying, Esoteric Surgery, and Vacuity. And those all go in a row. And they're kind of down towards the end of the set list of this album. There's only two songs after them. So I think it would be normal to put this on and for the first two or three be like, okay, kind of like what the fuck's going on? I'm not too sure where the hook is coming here. Um, Now that being said, Art of Dying is a very, very heavy song. And can be a bit overwhelming. I listened to it driving home tonight and I loved it, but you know, I'm used to some heavier stuff at this point. But something like Vacuity and Esoteric Surgery, or even The Way of All Flesh, I think could be some pretty good songs to get into on this.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I like Ouroboros. I don't actually like Toxic Garbage Island.
Mhm.
It's probably the only song off this album that I don't really like, and I don't really know why I don't really like it because it is a popular one. But it's, I would say the two things about Ouroboros and Garbage Island is Toxic Garbage Island is a little bit clunky, and it's quite loud. So it could be like if this is the first one you listen to off this album, you're a little bit like this is a bit much. Same with Ouroboros. I think the time signatures on it are really weird, and if you're not into that kind of, because it's jumpy,
Mhm.
the guitar, the riff at the start of it is great, but once it gets to the lyrics, I think it gets a bit weird, and
Yeah.
again, it's just not digestible. So I would say, yeah, if someone's to ask me what song should I listen to of this album first, I would probably say Esoteric Surgery is the first song, and
Yeah.
then Vacuity. Maybe I would swap that on the given on any given day, but one of those two songs I think are the most, like Esoteric Surgery in particular is really cool, like, and like the guitar work on Gajira is very interesting. It's nice.
Yeah.
um it's quite palatable as well, but yeah, I would probably say Esoteric Surgery first, because it's a little bit slower as well, while still being quite heavy.
Yeah. And I think, you know, they have a few albums that are of similar quality to this. Like I personally would put L'Enfant Sauvage up there with this one, although I do think it potentially is heavier in some respects, so it might be a little bit harder to get into.
I'm actually not as familiar with that album. Is that the one before or after? Um, Let me look at the.
It's
I'll know it
after
from
it. It
the.
came out in like 2012. Fantastic album, but you know, it's got some very heavy moments in there, and
I think the one I would go to if you asked me to give a second Gojira album, what I would you go for From Mars to Sirius, which is
mhm,
fucking class. There's some really nice. Backbone is great.
Flying
To
Whale.
Sirius is great. Yeah. Where Dragons Dwell. That's a good one. Now, I mean, Gojira's late. Gojira have kind of they've gotten really proggy now, I would say. I think
I
they
stopped
had an
listening
album.
after. I haven't listened to anything since that Magma album.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. That one kind of I really wanted to like that album, but and it's not that it's bad, it didn't tickle me the right way.
Right.
But yeah, no, so look, yeah, you and to be honest with you, I, I would say tentatively that you could probably throw From Mars to Sirius in there as an alternative for The Way of All Flesh, but I think The Way of All Flesh is the safest bet, which is why I would have selected it.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good band for introducing you into more someone into a more extreme type of metal. So yeah, do that. Or Cataclysm.
Or Cataclysm, another good one. Potentially a Monomarth, or yeah.
Oh, Monomarth are actually a very good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I mean, particularly some of their kind of their like their second or their third album, like Twilight of the Thunder God is a very I keep
Yeah.
using these words it's a very accessible album, and like they're cool, they're catchy, they're bar music, but they are technically death metal at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that is a fairly good summary of the types of things that you could try to get into. I suppose one thing I would stress is, if one of these in particular catches your fancy, just follow that rabbit hole and, experiment with bands who are similar to them. And you may never get into things like Gojira, uh, and that's okay. And there may be classic albums that you don't get into for whatever reason, or you may find that you don't like them now and you get into them later on. The interesting thing about metal I found is that you know it's such a diverse genre with so many different sounds in it that you can really go on quite a kind of windy trail of different phases of enjoying different types of it, and things that you love may start to wane and you might lean into something else and come back to the thing that you loved at a different point. But it's uh it's an interesting journey of trying to find stuff that is challenging but enjoyable. So don't listen to an album 5 or 6 times in a row and hate it. I certainly did that with like Transylvanian Hunger and stuff like that. I made the mistake of trying to jump into like Behemoth and Mayhem and stuff like that very early on, and I was like, what the hell is this, and why do people enjoy it? So don't try to force yourself
I
to
still
enjoy
feel that way
something.
about Mayhem.
Yeah, very overrated, I think. Um, at the end of the day, it's music. You're meant to enjoy it. Listen to it a few times. If it's not for you, you can come back to it at some point.
No, if you're not cult, you're not cool.
Yeah, you're a fucking loser, boy.
Okay. 2 hours. I don't think anyone will get to the end of this except for maybe Tom, and only to tell us that he doesn't like anything other than Led Zeppelin. He's sick of listening to
Uh,
Metallica.
I think Tom will have dropped off by Metallica, to be honest.
Shout out Tom Purcell, cryptocurrency guru.
Just buy that dip. Buy that dip, man.
Just buy in the dip, buy in the dip. Oh, it's in the dip right now. We need to go.
Yeah, look, we don't need to cover anything else there. Cool. So listen to that stuff. If anybody is interested, I do have a playlist on Spotify, which is basically every metal song or thing that falls under that umbrella that I like. So that is literally just called metal, and I think I'm Kill O'Connor on Spotify. So you can find that on there if you want to search any of these and find them easily. Although probably don't have Godsmack or Killswitch Engage. But other than that, it's been good chatting. We might do another one of these metal related things soon, because to be honest, it's oftentimes more interesting than talking about training.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. Let me stop that screen share there and